Welcome to the 22nd Annual Acquisition Research Symposium. This is our second time doing a completely virtual online event, with the first time being during COVID. We value the advantages of an in-person experience, but we had to adjust to accommodate the current DoD travel restrictions. On the positive side, this year we have over 1,200 registrants, far exceeding the 400 participants we normally have in an in-person event. The word has certainly gotten out to the entire acquisition community to come and get involved, and each person can and does make a difference. Especially important this year on the heels of the recent executive order modernizing defense acquisitions and spurring innovation in the defense industrial base. The Navy Postgraduate School stands ready to provide world-class education, and the Acquisition Research Symposium stands ready to highlight world-class research in the areas that the executive order calls on for needed reform and improvement in order to deliver capability to the warfight at the speed and scale of relevance. Over the next several days, researchers will share their research, which highlights the impact of applied acquisition sciences research can have. Research focused on innovation and the integration of emerging technologies into warfighting systems. I encourage you to ask questions, share your perspectives. Together, we can achieve the mandated needed for acquisition reform. I'd like to share one NPS educational update since we last gathered. In October 24, the NPS Master of Science degrees in Program Management and the Advanced Acquisition Studies certificates were accredited by the Project Management Institute, demonstrating NPS's commitment to teaching the internationally recognized and industry-accepted standards of project, program, and portfolio management principles. Demonstrating our commitment to change, this is also our first symposium where we've combined the traditional research areas in acquisition sciences with an Acquisition Innovation Summit. The second half of the day tomorrow kicks off the Innovation Summit with a fireside chat between the NPS president and the Defense Innovation Unit Director. I'd like to recognize the generous support of the symposium and acquisition research program by the Office of the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, the Navy Director of Acquisition Talent Management, and the Navy PEO Integrated Warfare Systems. This year's symposium is also supported by the Naval Warfare Studies Institute and the NPS Foundation. This year's symposium is a result of a 6-month planning effort led by the acquisition program PM, Carrie Schaefer, the ARP communications manager, Maureen Lauder, and as well as folks who really make ARP work, Nadia Greer and Giselle Benson. And now I'd like to introduce the president of NPS, Vice Admiral Retired Anne Rondeau. You can all read Admiral Rondeau's bio, which highlights her distinguished naval career, but what I see is someone who's committed to serving others. Also, someone who's committed to education. She holds a doctorate in education, culminated her naval career as president of the National Defense University, and led one of the largest single community colleges in the country as president of the College of DuPage in Illinois before being appointed the 13th president of NPS in 2019. Please welcome Admiral Rondeau for symposium opening remarks.
Good morning to all. For those of you on the East Coast, it's about your lunchtime. The sun is rising on the West Coast. We want to really welcome all of you globally to this symposium. I want to thank, actually, Dr. Bob Mortlock, first of all. NPS has a great history of working on acquisition and on the entire work of education and research in this world. They've been ahead of trends. They've been pacing trends. And this is a group at NPS that is committed to making a difference. And we are ready, and we are there, and we're ready to act now. And what a time it is to act. This is an environment in which change can be accommodated by really good knowledge and by expertise that can move everything faster and forward. Bob talked about the executive order. And in that executive order, there are a number of things mentioned that acquisition is a national strategic asset, that it does not provide the speed and the flexibility needed for our warfighters. But I ask this of all of you who are out there. Is this a time to maintain the status quo? That is good enough. It's good enough. And I would challenge all of us to really be focused on the theme of this year. It's about creating the synergy for change, and that the status quo is not enough. We do not have what we need for the processes, the policies, the people, the workforce, and the problem-driven focus that we need to have versus all the time a requirements focus. Sometimes the problems get ahead of the requirements, and we need to understand those in order to make any kind of requirements have more sense. So this great event today, and then also on Thursday and Friday, is intended to bring experts. If you saw this room where we are today, it is a great center for being able to have this online virtual experience. There are pros here who are going to make this entire symposium special, different, and part of the environment for this day and this moment: modern, fast, and responsive. So NPS stands ready. We're going to have some great speakers. I will be with you with the head of DIU, Mr. Doug Beck, and you have many other speakers here today. So we stand ready. We are delighted to have you with us, with your coffee, with your lunch, with your dinner, wherever you are. Please be part of this. Give us your feedback. Ask those great and challenging questions to our experts, and understand that we have a time now. If not us, who? Because the experts are here to make the various changes. I challenge us, and then give us some of the work that you need us to do, because you are our clients, and you're also our partners and our colleagues, and together we can come and certainly work towards problems, solve them quickly, and get to the point of always being ready. Thank you very much, and again, we welcome you here, and have a great symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral Rondeau. And now I'd like to welcome the Honorable David Berteau to introduce our keynote speaker. David Berteau's support to NPS, ARP, and the symposium can't be understated. He's helped guide some of the most impactful plenary panel discussions over the last 7 years, and he continues to do so. Mr. Berteau is President and CEO of the Professional Services Council, and prior to that, he was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics and Material Readiness. Honorable Berteau, over to you, please.
All right, thank you very much, Bob, and thanks to all who've joined us for this incredibly important conference. Admiral Rondeau's remarks make it clear what the stakes are and what the opportunities are. I've been involved in nearly every one of the 22, this being the 22nd of these conferences back to the beginning. And I've seen both the impact of the conversations and the presentations that are done here. And I've also seen the evolution of the participants and the attendees. Folks who were 03s and 04s when we did the first ones back in the mid-aughts are now flag and general officers who are shaping today and the future of DoD procurement and acquisition. And it's really a tremendous gift to be able to continue to do this. In particular, we're pleased this morning to welcome our opening keynote speaker, Mr. Steve Morani. Steve is the performing the duties of, we used to call that acting. We've turned a short word into a long acronym now, of the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. I guess you're still technically dual-hatted as the acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Sustainment as well, although somebody else is performing those duties, Steve. And eventually you get to go, you're third job, your real job. So you're doing three jobs at once, and I know what it's like to do that. Mr. Morani actually had a long career in the Air Force, starting in 1983, which was before the federal acquisition regulations existed. They were in the process of writing them at the time. So, Steve, you've seen this whole career unfold there, culminating in his final tour of duty as the Chief of Material Support Division, Headquarters, U.S. Air Force. Retiring with the rank of colonel. He entered into the senior executive service in 2011. And I will tell you, had I known that you were there, I would have leaned on you hard to come to work for me when I was the assistant secretary now 11 years ago. But obviously, the previous assistant secretary managed to pull you up into that realm as well. You've got a huge opportunity here to convey some updates for us, because what a dynamic time we're in. And then we'll go into some questions from the floor, and you and I will have a little conversation. So, Mr. Morani, welcome to the Acquisition Research Symposium, and I will go off mic and off camera and turn the microphone over to you.
Well, thank you, David. And you are right. It is some challenging times with some great opportunity ahead for us. So appreciate the kind introduction and your leadership of the Professional Service Council over the past 9 years. You retire, and it's a well-earned retirement, I'll say, as one of the country's most respected thought leaders in national security realm. So thank you for your leadership, and thank you for your advice and mentorship along the way. I also want to thank the Naval Postgraduate School for this opportunity, this honor to give a keynote. I appreciate any opportunity to be able to share what we're doing in the Pentagon and all the great work that our acquisition community is doing. As you said, I'm serving as the acting, so to speak, Acquisition and Sustainment. Was thinking I'd be out of a job by now, but I think maybe a few more weeks before, at the discretion of Congress, we will get a confirmed undersecretary. So I'll keep the machine turning until he gets here. Meanwhile, our ANS organization is moving out on the Defense Secretary's three broad priorities: reviving the warrior ethos, increasing lethality with high, uncompromising, and clear standards, rebuilding our military by matching capabilities to threats, and reestablishing deterrence to defend our homeland and working with allies and partners to protect America's vital interests abroad. Over these past 100 plus days, the ANS team has been on the equivalent of what I would call a wartime footing, implementing the multiple directives and executive orders corresponding with our roles and responsibilities. Early on, we provided follow-up direction to the President's government efficiency EO, reducing unnecessary or duplicative spending, whether that was in consulting contracts or our government purchase cards, or with our vast real estate portfolio, which is hundreds of thousands of properties. We completed a 30-day review of contracting policies, and we received nearly 170 inputs from across the department. So that was a really comprehensive review. We quickly identified opportunities to streamline and simplify acquisition processes, enabling personnel to meet warfighter needs in a most efficient and cost-effective manner. As the Secretary Higgs has recently put it, from process to people, from consultants to corporals, we are looking across the enterprise. For instance, in response to President Trump's missile defense EO, ANS is working through the industrial base and supply chain challenges associated with a very complex, multi-layered Golden Dome C2 architecture. And we have plenty of opportunity ahead of us. Missile defense is one of several major areas, including munitions, shipbuilding, cybersecurity, unmanned systems, to just name a few, in which DoD is working to better match our capabilities to these current and emerging threats. Regarding our defense budget, we performed a rigorous analysis shortly after the inauguration to really take a relook at the PB-26. This is a very common process when any new administration comes in, and it was so that we could assess what programs and assets that we needed to reprioritize to match the new direction of the president. So that has been complete. To that end, and in support of the executive order that's focusing on modernizing defense acquisition and spurring innovation, we began a review last month of the department's 72 major defense acquisition programs, focusing on performance measured primarily by cost and schedule. So while the military requirements and budget decisions are really beyond the purview of A&S, it is our obligation to ensure via policies and oversight that the needed capabilities are produced more rapidly at scale and delivered at affordable cost. So achieving these results is not going to come from doing more of the same. I think we all recognize that. And it's not going to come by just making minor tweaks. It really requires the defense acquisition community to think and act differently about the systems we buy and how we buy them. Elements of these overdue changes have been in the works to varying degree in compliance with previous NDAAs and DoD directives. For example, through the Adaptive Acquisition Framework, which was initiated by Undersecretary Ellen Lord during the first Trump administration, DoD has been able to tap new technologies more rapidly than in the past. We have accelerated pathways for software and the mid-tier of acquisition, as well as contracting approaches like other transaction authorities and commercial solutions openings. But using these streamlined acquisition and contracting methods has often remained few and far between by the evidence we've seen, rather than them being the standard operating way that we go about acquisition. What's needed by this point isn't new rules or regulations, or I would say we don't need radical reform, but we need a change in culture and behavior that makes speed and innovation an overriding priority. Let's talk about that change. So there was a memo on March 6th that the Secretary published. This was a software policy memo, and this was an early sign that the administration is determined to drive change in how the system operates. As you know, this memo requires that when it comes to software development, more agile acquisition approaches like the software acquisition pathway, the OTAs, the CSO that I mentioned, will become the rule and not the exception. The same spirit and goal animated President Trump's EO dealing with defense acquisition, industrial base, and contracting. These EOs, same approach. In effect, the guidance the Secretary's software memo was applied to defense procurement as a whole. So we have to think about it in terms of not just software, but hardware, products and services, weapon systems platforms, and sustainment. Most importantly, these directives are standardizing authorities and processes that already existed but were underused. Decades of bureaucratic habits are hard to overcome without firm and engaged leadership from the top, and we have that leadership. That includes a new emphasis on commercial contracting and pricing in keeping with long-standard federal law. Then there's the joint requirements process. You know, we often think of the acquisition process as the end-to-end process, but it really starts with requirements. And often it's a source of over-exquisite specifications that take years to establish and often results in delays. The A&S Competitive Advantage Pathfinder effort that we have underway is attacking this challenge by turning a step-by-step march of requirements, budget, and acquisition deliberations, what we commonly call the iron triangle, or you might refer to it as three legs of the stool, into a more concurrent and iterative process. Under direction from the President, the Department is also rethinking the JASIS apparatus to streamline the end-to-end delivery of warfighting capability. Implementing the scale of change will require a workforce that becomes more proficient and confident in more rapid and commercial-based acquisition approaches. So, for example, we're looking at including proficiency training with CSO, OTAs, and other non-traditional vehicles in our core training requirements and performance evaluations for our contracting and acquisition workforce. At the same time, leadership must show they will back up their acquisition professionals if going faster, which we have to be honest, may entail more program and technical risk, leads to unforeseen outcomes. Nonetheless, more often than not, the warfighter and the taxpayer will come out ahead with this approach. And we need to really have a defense acquisition culture that prioritizes speed with precision over an acquisition culture that prioritizes process and compliance. And we have to stay focused on delivering a capability that provides the lethality that our warfighter needs. Of course, all the defense acquisition reform and technology innovation in the world is of little avail if it cannot be produced, sustained, and distributed at scale. So I have this coffee mug on my desk. It's got 3 words on it that reminds me every day that logistics wins wars. It's all part of what I would call the deterrent effect of logistics and sustainment. So the idea is that if a potential adversary knows that your logistics capabilities are robust and deep, and that you are committed for the long haul, they'll be less likely to engage in hostilities because they know that they'll not just be outgunned and outmaneuvered, but they'll also be outsustained. In recent years, spurred by the COVID crisis and the war in Ukraine, there has been fresh understanding of the importance of Americans' domestic manufacturing and supply chains, from medicine to minerals to munitions. In response, over the past 3 fiscal years, nearly $2 billion in Defense Production Act funding has been obligated to enhance domestic industrial capacity for microelectronics, castings and forgings, batteries, solid rocket motors, energetics, and more. A&S is overseeing the implementation of the National Defense Industrial Strategy, which focuses on deterrence through the Indo-Pacific, and in doing so, we are aligning industrial-based investments to support the priorities laid out by the President and the Secretary. It's become clear that America's ability to deter China will depend in large part on our defense production capacity. With President Trump's critical minerals EO providing an added push, we are realigning industrial-based investments through the Defense Production Act and the industrial-based analysis and sustainment programs. This includes expanding investments in domestic and allied mining, processing, stockpiling, recovering, and recycling of minerals. In fact, 2 weeks ago, our industrial-based policy team visited a site in North Carolina that is producing rare earth magnets for both defense and commercial applications, all independent of Chinese sourcing. Without getting ahead of the program review process, it's been clear that munitions, particularly long-range precision munitions and interceptors, are major concerns and are going to be a significant DoD priority. Within A&S, we have a unit called the Joint Production Accelerator Cell, commonly called the JPAC, that's been working this challenge for a better part of 3 years. And they've been engaging industry and traveling to factories around the country to assess where shortages exist and that can be perfected with targeted investment. Last month, we reestablished the Munitions War Room to expand and accelerate production rates of high-demand munitions, long-range strike, air and missile defense to meet U.S. and foreign partner demand. The War Room will also pursue methods to increase munitions magazine depth over time. We'll do this through life extensions, upgrades to older stocks, public-private partnerships, and drive construction of new production. And all the President, the Secretary, and the congressional leadership recognize the urgency of this industrial capacity challenge. Senator Wicker's Forge Act, for instance, highlights some of the opportunity we have as a department and as a nation, ways to cut red tape, create more competitive defense marketplaces, modernize the defense budgetary process, and enable decisive action, all in service of unleashing the power of American industry. And we look forward to working with Congress as the bill continues to be refined and eventually on its implementation. So beyond the assembly line, U.S. military success also depends mightily on keeping combat systems operational and mission capable. Now, there's a widespread understanding when it comes to readiness and operational availability that the U.S. defense enterprise has been falling short. Consider that more than 300 of the reportable systems that we monitor, less than a third are meeting readiness and availability goals set by the services. Within A&S, we're developing what we're calling a material readiness campaign to enhance operational availability of major weapons platforms. It's clear that we need more logistics and sustainment capacity in multiple areas to do this. And that is in areas like maintenance, repair, and overhaul, in distribution. And in the distribution space, we're talking everything from warehouses to delivery vehicles to more ships and more cargo aircraft. In the commercial defense industry, but also in our organic industrial base as well. In addition to sustainment capacity, we need to look at sustainment innovation. And oftentimes we don't use innovation and sustainment together. We often think of innovation as new. But you know, it also means embracing the data-driven analytics and decision-making tools that we can use for sustainment. And there are digital tools available to identify and quantify readiness degraders, mitigate supply chain risks, and optimize resource allocation across all domains and services. We just need to put these tools to use. Leveraging the data foundation we have available, A&S is looking to integrate best practices across organization in a more holistic and quantifiable manner. There were also some lessons learned from Ukraine about providing support and repair from outside a combat theater. We term this the near abroad, and we established MRO capabilities and telemaintenance capabilities, and now we're applying these same kind of lessons and methods across regions. But make no mistake, the current pacing priority is still Indo-PACOM, where the U.S. forces will be taxed by longer distances and longer lines, external lines of communication. Large theater level maintenance and supply hubs that we've used in the past, where we had availability of real estate, we're not going to have that. Certainly not within the first island chain are we going to have access to that. So the military services are all leaning forward to overcome these challenges. Any environment, I would say, is contested, but this particular environment's going to really challenge our ability to mitigate those contested areas of logistics. So finally, I would note that while administrations change, and with them policy and resource priorities, the obligation to keep U.S. forces ready, fight, and if necessary, get them to the fight and keep them in the fight doesn't change. These are the enduring requirements and the reason acquisition and sustainment competencies are core to winning wars. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
All right. Thank you, Steve. That was
David,
that was a great quick survey of a lot of areas to cover here. So I appreciate your touching on all those. I'll kick off with a handful of questions and we can talk about some of the issues you raised here. But I also want to invite those who are participants here to submit their questions. I believe the instructions are to type your questions into the chat, and Dr. Mortlock and others will curate these because we're likely to get more questions than we have time to answer them, and see if we can get the right ones up for your consideration, Steve. So you outlined, you know, an awful lot of activity going on, and you know, if you just track the number of executive orders, for example, issued by President Trump since Inauguration Day. So it's what day 100 was a week ago today. So I guess we're at day 107 here, and there's more than one per day. I think we're up in the 140s in terms of executive orders. Not all of them, of course, apply to DoD or to the federal government operations, but many of them do. What's your perspective on how we're handling this pace? Because you know, you're not finished the first one before the next one comes out, and so how do you manage that from a DoD wide perspective? Because there's a lot of people have a stake in the results here, and none of it's self-implementing, right? A lot of it you've got to study what to do and figure out what the next steps are. How are you structured and organized to do that?
Yeah, so that's a tough one there. So you're right. There are over 140 executive orders and proclamations that have been made since 21 January. I'll tell you, 27 of those are directly A&S equities. And as you mentioned, we're working them all simultaneously. We have a good team here. It's a pretty lean team, but we're doing it in collaboration with the services. This is how we do business in the building, because we all have to work together to implement these changes. You know, I'll say, fortunately, we had the opportunity to shape some of these in ways, you know, to help ensure that we can implement the president's priorities. So we've worked very closely with our partners in the NSC and over at the White House. You know, we're working closely to implement these with our DOGE teammates here in the building to make sure that we're getting after, you know, the savings that they're looking for. But, you know, it takes deliberate action to decompose these down. You know, I'll say, taking a matrix approach, making sure that all our teammates, you know, are leaning into them, you know, assigning them out to the appropriate organizations, and, you know, with regular follow-ups. So it's working. We have implementation plans that we put in place to make sure that we stay on glide path with the implementing timelines, because all of these EOs have, you know, 30-day, 60-day, you know, 90-day, 180-day milestones that we have to meet. So it's a lot of work, I'm not going to lie. And but I'll say, with that comes a lot of opportunity. I think many of us have said in our past, you know, if we had the opportunity to change something, if only I got rid of this constraint, right? This regulation, this requirement is constraining me. I could go faster if that were removed. I think there's a lot of that, and there's a lot of great ideas on how we can go with speed and precision to achieve, you know, the requirements that our warfighter needs, but do it faster. So these reform efforts are going to help us. It's our opportunity, right? So let's take advantage of it. I mentioned we have that top-down leadership support from the president on down. So we're in alignment when it comes to those who, from the bottom up, want to institute change. We have the top cover of our leadership to do that. So we're excited about it. We know it's a lot of work, but I think, you know, the outcome is worth it. And I'll just end this question. So I have a quote that I had on my whiteboard for a long time. It was from Halford Mackinder. I don't know if anyone knows who that is. He's a British historian from, you know, circa 1900. So he wrote this book before World War I. It was called Democratic Ideals and Reality, right? Are you familiar with this, David, at all?
I'm familiar with the title, but I've never read the book.
Yeah, so there's a great line in there. It says, democracy refuses to think strategically unless until compelled to do so for the purpose of defense, right? Said another way is, we don't act until there's a crisis and we need to defend ourselves. And I think we have, you know, a compelling reason to get after acquisition and sustainment, to deliver these capabilities that match the threat. And we have the top-down leadership of our president, our secretary, and the leadership in the building. So let's take advantage of that opportunity.
Well, I certainly associate myself with Mr. Mackinder's views there. I think the history of the last 50 years has shown that to be the case, and we're likely to see it again. What we hope is that we can act, and you talked about China as the pacing threat, and more than that, really. You know, we hope we actually act to prevent that crisis from occurring rather than to have it happen there. You touched on risk, Steve, in your comment there, and of course we all know. I mean, there's, you know, tens of thousands of contracting officers across DoD and program managers at every level and scale, and asking them to take risk is a big question, and I think one that they need to make sure they've got the cover of their leadership. And you mentioned that that's in place with the current team and the incoming team here. There's also a risk, it seems to me, in taking too long, right? And that's not a risk that we build into. I mean, you've been doing this business for 40 years now. It's not a risk that we often build into it. You mentioned, you know, barely a third of our systems today are at their goals in terms of mission capability and readiness. Well, I think if you had a chart of how many platforms that come in for repair are done early, how many are done on time, and how many take longer than we anticipated, we know that would not be an evenly distributed barbell. The takes longer than expected would be the heavy portion of that. I've never seen the data, but I suspect that's the case. You may disagree with it. How do we build in the value of time as a risk factor? You've got an opportunity here to do that in a whole host of activities underway and recalibrations of our guidance and our processes. Can we build that into it? I know I didn't clear this question with you ahead of time, but I really appreciate your answer to it, because it occurs to me as you're talking, the risk of taking too long is a very real risk that we often don't take into account.
No, I mean, that's a relevant question, and something that, you know, in our decision rubric, we need to build in. I think oftentimes our you know, assumptions that we set up, you know, for our analysis of alternatives on the front end, again, I'm talking about the requirements piece before we get into the acquisition, doesn't account for if we're late. You know, that is a risk. You know, it doesn't help me if I develop this exquisite capability and it's late to need. You know, I'm a production guy, you know, by trade, you know, more on the MRO side, and delivering that capability, you know, when on schedule, when needed, is part of what I get graded on, right? If I was producing sorties for a flying schedule, it wouldn't help if the airplane's late and the pilot misses his window over the range, right? Same in acquisition. You need to build that into your decision rubric in making the trades, right? Everything's a trade-off. But if you're taking too long to determine those, you know, oftentimes that's a sign of being risk averse. And you know, I'll be honest, sometimes it's a sign of being indecisive. So we need to build that in up front, and it needs to be part of your analysis. And you need to be able to communicate the risk of maybe perhaps not delivering a full capability, but, you know, again, is 80% enough? And can later on, when technology catches up, I can add that capability. Is that the right approach? So this goes back to reframing the question and rethinking requirements and how we deliver them in a manner that addresses speed and precision. So this is part of challenging the workforce, David, like I mentioned, and doing things differently. You know, we have the tools and we have, I'll say, the frameworks and, you know, the options. We just need to put them in place, and we need to be more decisive, deliberate about how we deliver those capabilities. And I think if we start thinking that way and rewarding that kind of behavior, training our workforce to think in that manner, that's how we're going to get after this. Over.
That makes a lot of sense. And you talked about innovation and sustainment as an area we don't often look at least not at headquarters level. And innovation more broadly, I think, you know, in systems and processes, it's not just a new tech data package, a new technology, a new you know, platform or new incorporation of a component into that platform. It's systems and process innovation as well. And there's nothing more ripe for that, I think, than the logistics and sustainment world in DoD. Is that something that's on the radar screen? It's not explicitly called out in any of the executive orders, but I think it's implicitly attached to the success of a number of these executive order reviews.
No, you're absolutely right. And you know, what I was getting at, my comments on that kind of innovation, you know, process innovation, you know, the DoD produces a tremendous amount of data. We offload it off platforms. We have management systems. We use it. We put it in these data environments, and then we don't action it. We don't take it and use it and do the analytics. But now we have more intuitive analytic tools, and what we need to do is teach our workforce how to apply the appropriate measures so that they understand what that data is telling them, and we can be innovative, like you said. One of those, you know, sustainment process innovations is predictive maintenance based on evidence of need, rather than the, you know, fly it till it fails, or, you know, a scheduled maintenance interval, but that we're using analytics to understand how systems are performing and degrading, and that we can control when we repair them, right? We don't let them, I'll say, have unscheduled breaks. we are monitoring the performance, and then we hold the tank or truck or aircraft down prior to that, do the maintenance. Just that savings alone increases our availability. So to your point, it doesn't have to be some new technology. It's really applying the technologies we have. And in the sustainment enterprise, many of those technologies are commercially available today that we can apply. And I use that, I say you don't hear sustainment innovation used together a lot. Oftentimes because there is a lot of innovation going on, I'll say in our depots, you just don't hear about it because they're preventing the non-available time. They're fixing it before it becomes a crisis. So you may not hear about it, but they're applying, different methods of manufacturing, automation, laser depainting, for example, is a tool that's more precise. Same with applying coatings using robotics or robotic manufacturing. So applying these tools, which are commercially available, will help us increase that availability. So thanks for the question.
I appreciate that. I mean, we've been pursuing the dream of predictive maintenance for 30 years or more. But it may well be that we've got the data, the ability to use the data and interpret it rapidly, and the ability to turn the results of that into real actions. That potential may be greater now than it's ever been. And building on that.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I think that was what was missing, one of the key elements that was missing. But now we have that. And now what we need is to make sure our workforce understands how to use that tool to their advantage. You
mentioned also that, of course, there are some areas where we don't have good enough data. You mentioned the supply chain challenges that we have, and we've been wrestling with that for a long time. In fact, I think it was one of President Trump's original executive orders, 13806, that got us down that road way back in industrial base in 2017. By the way, part 2 of that, I used to say, you got to look at the logistics and sustainment side. And I remember Eric Tuning at the time saying, we'll do that in phase 2. Well, it's 8 years later. We haven't got to phase 2, but it's time to get to phase 2, Steve. I think you would agree on that. But what do you have underway on the supply chain side? It's not only, we learned a lot from COVID. Now we're learning a lot from, the potential of tariffs and other trade deals to be cut off. DoD doesn't really own its supply chain. It depends on both a domestic and a global supply chain. What kind of progress are you making in terms of how you identify and tackle those problems, whether it's, rare earth minerals or other critical supply chains? I know DLA's got an effort underway. I assume those services do as well.
Yeah, so no, that's a great question, and I appreciate that. To your point, we've been on this journey for a while. So I'll cover a couple areas. One is the supply chain risk management piece, and I'll go back to being able to see ourselves and see into our supply chains, multi-layers in. We're challenging our OEMs to provide that information to us so that we have, the pedigrees of the components and understand who's manufacturing them, where they're coming from, so that we have a better understanding of what the department's total demand signal is for some of these critical areas. So getting that visibility is important, and we're getting after it in a couple of different ways. In the past 3-4 years now, we've helped in partnership with all of the services, industry, and academia, really put together a supply chain risk management framework, taxonomy, and then a strategy on how we want to implement that. One of the things we just did recently is a BPA. I think I got that term right. Blanket purchase agreements that our DASD log issued, which has, I think, up to 9 commercial supply chain illumination companies who were down selected to provide this service. So the services can go use any of these tools, commercial tools, to see into their supply chains based on what kind of information they're looking for. And then, once we buy it, we can share that across the department, on those different supply chains. So we're using commercial tools. We also have some government tools that can consolidate and aggregate data in ways you can't do with a commercial tool to help us see as well. And then, we're working closely with the CIO and our CDAO to make that data available and to ensure that we have in contracts that we're asking for the right information so that we can see ourselves. So that's one way of getting better at understanding our supply chain risks and where we need to pay attention and perhaps invest more in. And then, you mentioned, critical minerals. We put together the National Defense Industrial Strategy, which identified the 5 critical supply chains, right? Critical minerals is one of them. Batteries, kinetics, I mentioned those in my comments. But, in collaboration and in combination with the EO, we're going to, on executive order on minerals, we're going to start making some targeted investments to make sure that the process flow for taking a mineral out of the ground and turning it into a product that I can put into a weapon system, that is all domestic, right? So we have some investments there, through our DPA authorities, through our IBAS program. We have the Office of Strategic Capital so that we can use loan programs. But most importantly, we're doing this with the White House team and the NSC and the Economic Dominance Council. So it's really a whole of government, whole of nation approach that's going to get after this. So it's pretty exciting, actually. It's, again, back to that top-down direction, and top cover and support is going to help us move faster. Over.
It's huge, and we're still very early. I mean, it's day 107 of 1,461 days. I've often thought, and this is my 8th transition to be associated with, what you get started in your first year is what you get done by your 4th year, and it's really critical to hit the ground running on this. Bob, I have some more questions, but before I go there, let me open up to you and see if there are any good questions that are timely and relevant that have come in from the participants and in the crowd here.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we do have about 24 questions, and so we'll just go through maybe a couple of them.
Are they yes or no questions? Just kidding.
Yes, sir. The first question, where can we find the acquisition policy changes that have been recommended and or implemented as a result of the 30-day review of current policies and processes?
Yeah, so I'm gonna phone a friend on this. I think our A team, our ASD acquisition team, has compiled those. As part of their EO implementation plan. That's one of the steps they're doing. I don't think they've published them yet, but when we do, we'll make sure that they're available on our ANS website. I know we will be distributing them, through the service teams that are working on that to get out to the community. In concert with that, we're also working on some reform for acquisition regs. That was another EO that came out on how we're going to streamline that. So I'll say that question, I'm not sure who asked it, but if you're a DoD member, that, again, we're working in collaboration with your service or your fourth estate activity to make sure that we're distributing that. So I'll take a note here to make sure that we not only post it on our website, but that we make sure that as we work through that information gets distributed down through those services, right? Through their senior acquisition executive offices and the organizations from the headquarters down to the subordinate commands so that it gets to the field.
Thank
Steve,
you,
I'll
sir.
put in a plug there as well.
I think we'll try one more from the Q&A. Where we talk a lot about change and reform, and where in the acquisition chain of command do you see the most resistance to cultural change?
Oh, yeah. So I see it in the same area I see all resistance to change. Whether it's in our commercial side. I think you all have heard the term frozen middle, right? Oftentimes it's not the new entrant to the workforce who's very excited and eager and wants to do well that is resistance. It's those who maybe because they've been around a long time, change is hard, and it changes your calculus, or it moves your cheese, or whatever example you want to use. It's uncomfortable. So we really have to work through that area. There's change agents, and we quite frankly need more of those. And then there's folks because they're scared of it, don't want to change. And that's oftentimes that middle area. And what we need to do is help them understand why this is going to help them in the long run, right? It'll help us deliver capability quicker. It actually often will streamline the work they have to do if you learn that new skill and learn that new process, and not be afraid of it. So oftentimes it's the leaders that need to educate that frozen middle and help them along. I find it's rare, honestly, it's rare that you'll have somebody who will just absolutely resist and not change. But there are some people that will do that. And honestly, if you find those, you need to move them out of the way. That's the only way that you're gonna be successful at implementing that change. I find that they're few and far between, but once you identify that, then and you clear that barrier, change isn't as hard as you think.
Steve, you mentioned success stories in the depots, for instance, that almost never see the light of day, right? And you know that the nature of our system is we spend a lot more time focusing on a visible problem or something that a bad news story than we do good news stories. Maybe one of the ways you can encourage that support for change is to give a little more visibility to places where it's working, because people are willing to take a little more risk if they know somebody else is taking that risk and it worked out okay. And
Absolutely. That's a great point.
There'd be an opportunity there. So, Bob, if I could do one more question, I know we're going to run close to the end of time here, and then I'll come back to you. Steve, you talked about commercial solutions openings as a way forward. You talked about the software fast track. The SWIFT is moving in that direction. And you also talked about the complexity of the requirements process at the front end. One of the things we've seen over time is that a commercial solution may come very close to delivering what DoD thinks it needs, but not fully fulfill it. So, you can get to speed if you can adjust what you need to be what you can get. Is that being taken into account as you look? I mean, the March 6th memo on SWIFT, for instance, is 2 months ago now. I think the implementing guidance deadline was 30 days, but presumably that's for internal coordination, not for public release. So we're eagerly awaiting to see how that's going to be implemented. But isn't part of that implementation, and more than just software, obviously across the board? You talked about this, the BPA that the DASD Logistics has put out to get to some commercial, supply chain illumination companies there. How do you get DoD to accept what is available rather than to require some changes to that, which takes time and money and becomes obsolete?
Yeah, so the simple answer, yes, it is being considered. Absolutely. We have that term commercial derivative, right? I think this conversation we're having and this approach that we're trying to implement, is going to change a little bit the definition of that. But you're absolutely right. Let's take a commercial product, say it gets us to that 80% solution, and then let's implement it. And then if there is some kind of tailoring or modernizing that we have to do, let's do that in a deliberate way. Or let's, for example, look at that commercial solution, and if it meets 85% of the requirement, then now let's re-examine the requirement. Maybe we can solve that 15% another way, and I don't have to change that commercial solution at all. So this goes back to thinking about acquisition differently and not being locked into, the perfect, elegant, exquisite solution. Because, threats change all the time, requirements change, but we have to be open in how we think about solving it, and not just solving it with that one exquisite system, but a combination of requirements that could solve it in different ways. I think that's part of the change in cultural and behavioral that we're looking for in the new way of thinking. Over.
So maybe what you do is both. You take what you can get now, and you have an effort underway to say, okay, how do I need to modify this to be more nearly perfect? But in the meantime, you get what you have, what you can get now.
Sure, and I mean, again, you're still going to need your exquisite systems. I'm not trying to make this like it's a simple problem. We will absolutely need those, small number, highly exquisite, capable systems. But again, back to a combination. and what does that combination look like? And, how do I implement it quickly, precisely, and affordably? This is opening up your aperture and how you view solving or matching a capability to a threat. That makes sense?
Fantastic. Yep. Bob, time for one more question from the audience.
Fantastic. And this question has to deal with the acquisition workforce. All these acquisition programs, all these reform efforts require manpower and talents. How do we address sustaining good quality acquisition workforce?
No. So I probably owe that person a coin who asked that. That was going to be my closing comment if I didn't get this question. But so that is a conundrum, isn't it? How do we solve that, particularly in this environment? I know there is a tremendous amount of angst out there in the community. There's angst right here in the building about workforce, with how we're approaching downsizing the federal government, right? And the federal government's much bigger than the DoD, but we're caught up in that effort as well. And it is what it is, and we're having to address it. But I will tell you that there is tremendous understanding inside the building here of how important the acquisition workforce is. And I say acquisition, but it's everybody. It's our program managers, it's our contracting officers, it's our engineers, it's our acquisition attorneys, it's our logisticians, it's all those people who operate the MROs and supply chain organizations, the item managers. This whole acquisition and sustainment community that ensures that we have our weapon systems to support, not only we acquire them, but we sustain them for our warfighter, is important. And they understand that that's core to our mission. These are core capabilities to delivering mission effects. So how do you reward and incentivize? We're talking about different ways of measuring and rewarding success. How can we accelerate promotions? How can we reward people? I mean, we don't have a lot of incentives that we can use. Monetary incentives only go a certain way. But how do we do that is, we're examining that right now. That said, what keeps people in the fight is I'll say challenging, rewarding work as well. I've been in this business, like you said, David, over 40 years because I'm biased towards a life service and defense of the nation. I mean, I could go out and do something else, and I will at some time, but I'm here because I want to be. Recognizing that in people, thanking them, awarding them, giving them challenging work, and most of all, teaching and mentoring so that you're prepared to operate at the next level if that's what you want to do is part of how we keep a workforce, right? It's one thing to recruit, hire, but the retention of it is, I find with the people who serve in this DoD, whether you're civilian or you're active duty military or you're a contractor, rewarding work that's recognized and development are things that keep you motivated. So I want to thank everybody who's on the line right now, who's been doing this. It's not easy, it's challenging, and oftentimes it's thankless, but you're defending the nation. Your job is so important. It's in the preamble of the Constitution, right? Provide for the common defense. And I don't say that lightly. It is that important that our founding fathers put defense in the preamble. So thank you for what you're doing, and find ways to challenge yourself and each other. David, over to you.
Mr. Morani, that's an incredibly good closing comment there. In the end of the day, survey after survey has shown that the reason people get into military service, the reason people get into civilian service in DoD, even the reason why an awful lot of the contractors go to work for the companies they work for, is in fact that commitment to mission. They want to do important work that helps preserve America's freedom and dignity and our role in the world. And I think that's the bottom line in all that you have underway. We are so fortunate to have you in this position, performing the duties of. There's a lot of duties. There's a lot of performance. Thank you for taking time out of your day this morning to share your thoughts with us and to respond to some of the questions we've raised. Best of luck. Have a great day, a great week, a great month, and deliver the results we need. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, David, and thanks for the opportunity, and all the best to you.